In this module, we are going to talk about impact of global protests. In the contemporary world politics, we see that there are different types of individuals who are talking about in the support of globalization and against the process of globalization. And the developing world, especially, is going to make protests against the forces of globalization. They believe that it is giving more to the developed world. Either you can think differently. In this slide, how protesters are making different kinds of protests. Again, these are the protesters, and they are making protests against the forces there are. So we need to understand that if we are not trying to meet the demands of the people in time, the protests would be there. The Battle of Seattle that happened in 1999 is attributed as the star of anti-globalization movements. Tens of thousands of people came out on the streets to shut down the city. In response, there was intense global criticism on World Trade Organization that how it is selectively settling the disputes among nation states. And these are the following reasons that why there was more protests and criticism against World Trade Organization. Number one, environmental degradation. That trading nations are not taking care of those rules and regulations that could protect or sustain the environment, healthy environment, violation of human rights, poor labor standards. The Battle of Seattle contributed to the integration of labor, unionists, and environmentalists as corporate dominance was a common enemy of both groups. The issue of unchecked corporate profit was highlighted. When, according to Marx, surplus value is not shared with the proletariat class or the labor class, they definitely need to rise against the bourgeois or the entrepreneur. Therefore, it is a natural process when workers believe that they are not getting that economic fruit which should be shared by the businessmen or entrepreneurs, they rise and make conflicts. J18 protests took place in London and Eugene, Oregon, in response to environmental destruction and the growing gap between rich and poor. Protests in Genoa led to clashes between security forces and revolutionary protests. The legacy of Genoa included many injuries and even one casualty. These protests may have that demonstration effect which rose from Seattle movement or other movements regarding protesting against the forces of globalization. So leaders of the nations need to understand if some protests are going out there in any part of the world, they need to try to assist those people to fulfill their needs and demands in time through their respective government. They need to make a dialogue with them that please settle down these conflicts, that it could not have any ripple effect or any demonstrative effect upon other parts of the world. In 2010, police cracked down aggressively on demonstrators, arresting more than 1,000 people in Toronto while there was a G20 summit was going to be work. Similar actions have been followed on other events. Protests in Washington at International Monetary Fund or World Bank in 2002. These are the clear examples how protests start working against the global forces. free trade area of the Americas, protests in Miami, where negotiation on free trade was going on in 2003. So, all these examples are giving us a clear picture when basic needs or amenities of life are not fulfilled in time, how protesters go against the ruling elite. Look at this slide, that how IMF trapping countries in debt, it is being protested, and how they believe that IMF is holding the strings of different economies which are located in developing countries. Increased global protests have globally united the oppressed, social activists, non-governmental organizations and other anti or anti-globalists. Globalization processes are being resisted. Local issues of developing countries are globally recognized through social justice movement, advocacy of poor nations at global level. So, when those forces of globalization are only favoring or supporting the developed world and going against the norms, values of the developing world, so it integrated all the protesters, either they belongs to the developed world or to the developing world. So, we need to understand that if people are not being given those advantages equitably or as per given circumstances, they need to understand कि जब तक वो लोगों को सेटिस्फाई नहीं करेंगे, उनके मुकामी हालात के मुताबिक उनकी ज़रूरियात को पूरी नहीं करेंगे, तो वो यकीनन एहतजाज के लिए खड़े हो सकते हैं. तो बेहतर यही है कि बर वक्त उनके मुतालबात और उनकी ज़रूरियात को, ख़ास तौर पे जो उनकी बुनियादी ज़रूरियात हैं, उनको पूरा किया जाए ताकि वो मुकम्मल तौर पर मुतमईन रहें और पुरअमन रहें.